All right, here we have the sprayer. It's Jamie Wilson with Stoller's Edge, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of a tutorial. I've just dropped the intake hose in here, and if you look really closely, it's going to be a little bit hard to see, but on the end here is what we call the rock guard, or it's just the, I otherwise call it the microphone. It looks a little bit like a microphone, but we never want to operate the sprayer with that rock guard not on the intake hose. We want to make sure that it's always on there. It helps protect your machine. This here is our primer hose. This is our spit bucket, and so we have our paint here. It's a nice blue color. Now with the machine in itself, we need to plug it in. So if I could have a volunteer go and bring me that extension cord that's plugged in, we'll get this thing plugged in. Now, if I could just have you come around here, Danielle, I want to just point out a few other components. We have here a filter, and we'll look and make sure that it's nice and clean. Okay, so this thing is cleaned out. There's some water, fairly clean filter. Every once in a while, this thing should be changed. You just unscrew this filter here, okay? So I'm not going to do it now. Just going to put it back. So that's something that we always want to check at the end of each job, making sure that it's super, super clean. The other filter that we have is right here. If I unscrew this thing, the gun, you'll see that there better be a filter inside. So it's a little bit stuck inside here. There we go. That simply just sits in like so. Sometimes this thing, you screw it in counterclockwise, get it tight, but in this particular one, it just sits in there. Put this back in. And then the other thing that you should watch out for as far as how the paint goes in is you have your spray tip. This thing here, and this is a 517, which is fairly typical as far as the fan of the spray that we use for painting exterior houses. So I have this now. There's two ends. If ever you're spraying on the wall, if you can see how that end is larger, this end is where the fan comes from. If ever you're on the ladder and you're like, my sprayer is not, it's not spitting out, first step I always do is just turn this around and then pull the trigger on the wall and then brush out the excess paint with a brush, because it could be that the tip is clogged with something that's gone through the machine. Now, this is for actually getting a sprayer started, all I do is I take this off here, your housing. Okay. And as another device here, you have a safety mechanism here so that you can't pull the trigger. I'm just going to leave that in the off position and hook it on the can. So now that I have that extension cord, I should also make sure the machine's off before I actually plug this in, which it is. Here's my dial. And as you can see, you can barely read it because there's paint on there. The beginning is prime. This is where we spray, and typically for heavier paints, I'm usually not full bore, but I'm usually just a bit past the halfway mark. But the very first thing we do is we prime. Now I want to draw your attention to this little knob here. This is now pointed up to spray. If we point it down, this is where it's coming out of the primer hose. As you can see, the primer hose is here, coming into the spit bucket. And that's the very first thing I want to do. And it's a really good tip. Grab the handle of this before you turn it on, so that if you do turn it on, this thing doesn't start jumping and dancing on you, just in case there's a bunch of the machine is still pressurized and we don't want to be shooting paint all over the place. So I turn it right off, turn it on. There's a little on and off button at the back. So right now it's on. And now what I want to do is start sucking the paint into the intake hose, in through the machine, pressurize the machine, and what that's ultimately going to do is force the water out of the machine through the prime hose. I'm going to watch the prime hose carefully, because what will end up happening is I'll see water coming out, and then eventually I'll see the paint coming out, and that's when I stop. And I'm going to repeat the same process with the gun to get ready. So now I'm on. I turn my pressure up. And this, we're just going to wait a second here. You see it starting to come out? Okay, now I see it's getting a little bit thicker. Okay, I'm gonna stop. Now I'm gonna do the same thing with the gun. I've turned my pressure right down. I pull the trigger on the gun, and I'm gonna hold it, and then I'm gonna turn up on the pressure. Oh, before I gotta do that, I want you to notice here, I'm turning my the little black toggle switch at the bottom up to spray, so that I can have it now coming out of the gun instead of through the prime hose. Notice I have the gun, the actual housing and tip off the machine. Okay, a bit more. It's a little bit watery. Okay, so now I turn the pressure off. I'm going to turn the machine off altogether. And notice that I turn this down, but I'm still holding the trigger. It releases all the pressure out of the machine. I screw this back on, the housing back on with the tip. Good tip is to always have your spray guard on, so you can't accidentally pull the trigger as you're turning this on, although I know that myself that there's no pressure in the machine itself. And they're nice and tight. Now, what I'm going to do is turn this on. My pressure's off, and now I'm going to want to try this out on the wall. So I turn it on. I'm going to turn my pressure to where I want it to be for spray. We're going to see that it's now pressurized. We're ready to start spraying. Now, before I start spraying, I make sure that I have with me a roller pole and a clean brush. So it's right here. And I want to make sure I have my rag in my pocket. And now what I want to do is test the actual pressure on the machine with the wall. So I want to see how it sprays out. And I'll show you that in another video. Thank you.